Penelope said, jumping excitedly to her feet. I hesitated a bit, remembering Darlington's line, "Don't make girls protect you." But I also remembered what Lisa said, and let her help. Finding people you can rely on gives you strength. Whether or not they can actually be relied upon is beside the question. Behaving properly meant people trusted you, tried to help you. The more people like that you had, the more you could accomplish. Instead of letting them do everything for you, you just had to do the best you could, and people would naturally step up to help you out. Penelope got Mother to give her leave from work so she could focus on assisting me. Since I was finally interested, she told me she'd actually been investigating the murder of Kenton Motorized for the last 2 years, not only solidifying details that would be needed for the trial, but also tracing the killer's actions. Since Darlington had leaked this info, admittedly disguised as a threat, she now knew that Star Shooter had gone to the Motorized manor after leaving our place. It hadn't been taken apart for transport. Flying it like a kite would have attracted attention, and the winds were too strong. So someone must have been inside Star Shooter as it flew. But who could possibly do that?
"I saw your plane. It was balanced well. You were almost ready to fly it,"
Stephen had said when he came to visit me. It could fly, just not support the weight of an adult. So a child? I thought, and remembered how Faraday had described Tsukumajuku. A young boy, primary or middle school. Come to think of it, I'd noticed that Tsukumajuku was floating. What if he'd been flying Star Shooter? He was a detective, and anything he tried his hand at he quickly mastered as if he's been doing it for years. He could have learned how to fly a glider in no time. Yeah, he'd come to see me. Or, wait, he said he'd come there for me, and he'd come to where I was, but he'd come from 107 years in the future. If he was coming to see me from that far away, would he be able to arrive exactly where I was at the Motorized mansion? Wouldn't he have stopped by the Joestar mansion first? Then once he discovered I was out, he would have been able to use his detective skills to quickly ascertain my location and board my airplane. Because he was in a hurry. He had to join my hand with Lisa's. That was how Darlington had come to see Star Shooter abandoned at the manor. But of course Tsukumajuku would never have murdered Kenton Motorized. But the airplane had been found on the cliffs. So perhaps after moving me to Rome and Lisa, he hadn't vanished immediately, but climbed aboard Star Shooter once again and flown to the cliffs, where he found Kenton's corpse. Unable to report his discovery in person, he'd flown my plane as a kite to ensure she was discovered quickly. Which Stephen did. It made a kind of sense. In other words, the one who murdered Kenton and the one who moved the plane were different people. Forget the plane. My target had to be the murder itself. Once again we started at the Joestar mansion, following the movements of the knife with the Joestar crest on it. This had been assumed to travel with the airplane, causing confusion, but for now I was assuming it had been moved separately. "Do we believe our knife was stolen the day of the crime?" I asked. Penelope nodded.
"That's been verified. It was stolen while the Joestar mansion housekeeper was on her afternoon break. The police checked into it, but it was an old knife, sharpened regularly over the years, and the sheen of the blade and a few small marks proved it was ours."
If there was any chance of being missing earlier and simply not noticed, that would mean it and the plane didn't share starting endpoints. But if that was the truth, then oh well. That means Tsukumajuku and the killer trying to frame me for Kenton's murder must have been on our property at the same time. That thought reminded me of something. "Are you in some sort of danger right now?" Tsukumajuku had asked me that. Turned out he was right. I was. His mysterious power had sensed it, and brought him to me and transported me to Rome. And thanks to that, the killer's plan had been thwarted for at least the last 2 years. If I'd simply gone home after speaking to Darlington, I'd have been trapped completely in his web, and thrown in jail without a second thought. Someone was out to get me. Crap. That was a scary thought. I had to find him quick. How had the knife been moved? It was an hour and a half by foot from my house to the scene of the crime. If we planned to kill Kenton, he would have started by making sure Kenton left the gates of the school, but there wasn't enough time. She left school at 3:30. She was killed at the latest at 4:10. In the 40 minutes the murder happened and Tsukumajuku found the body, tied the glider to it like a kite, and then Stephen saw it and came running. Something about that seemed wrong. Had it been pure coincidence that Tsukumajuku found her body? He was a detective. He might have had a reason to head up the cliff. Was he already thinking about it when he met me in the Motorized manor? Or did he discover it after sending me to Rome? If he'd known something, why hadn't he mentioned it to me? And he wouldn't have asked if I was in danger. He'd have been more specific. Something had happened after I vanished. Something was hidden in the motorised home that led him to suspect Kenton was murdered. However, that had been my first and last time entering the main building, so I had no idea what that could be. On the other hand, that would go for Tsukumajuku as well, I thought. Keep thinking. Get back to the knife. Once Kenton had left school, it was too late, so they must have come to get the knife first, and then gone to kill Kenton on the cliff, which meant they already knew where Kenton was going that day. Who could possibly have guessed that Kenton would have gone to the cliff in that downpour? Kenton had told Stephen she was going to meet me, apparently, but who had lied to her about me wanting to meet there? They must be the killer, but they had to be someone I'd picked to give her the message. There were very few people who knew Kenton and I were close, and would think it was normal for the two of us to meet on the cliff. All of those people were very close to Kenton too. Or, I thought, perhaps meeting me was a lie Kenton herself invented. I didn't think Kenton had a boyfriend or anything, but would I have known if she had? No, I couldn't imagine any secret boyfriend would have called her to the cliff. Kenton would have seen that cliff as a place for the three of us. I was stuck again, so I went back to the knife. I still couldn't explain it at all. Were there any other clues? Penelope, about the knife. Did they find anything else belonging to the killer? As I asked, I had an idea. Footprints, for example. It had been raining that day, so it seemed likely there were tracks left when he entered the house. But Penelope shook her head.
None. The police and I both looked. But there is something strange. We found drops of rainwater from an open window down the hall into the kitchen, but no footprints, like he'd been floating in the air.
Well, that just made me think of Tsukumajuku again. But no, he had nothing to do with Kenton's murder.
Which reminds me, there are no footprints but yours in or around your tent, George. That's one reason why they suspected you.
Ah, that's because Tsukumajuku was floating. Him again. He could have done it, and that would avoid the absurd coincidence of two people with different motives in the same place at the same time. Was there no chance Tsukumajuku had taken a knife? I couldn't imagine he'd actually murdered Kenton, but given that he travelled through time to see me, was it really out of the question he'd taken a knife from my house? To protect himself? No, that didn't work. Tsukumajuku had guessed I was in danger. Perhaps he'd taken the weapon to help him protect me. Then what happened? He flew Starshooter to the motorised manor. I seemed fine. He left the house without using the knife, got on Starshooter and found Kenton while he was flying. She was dead. He couldn't report the discovery himself, so he turned Starshooter into a kite to call people to her, and left the knife there knowing full well it would be mistaken for the murder weapon? It didn't make any sense. I decided to force the hypothetical a step farther. Was there really no chance Tsukumajuku had murdered Kenton? What if Kenton had been the threat to me he'd mentioned? No, that didn't work. Kenton was my friend. Even if she wasn't the kind of girl to do anything horrible to anybody. But that meant Tsukumajuku didn't take the knife either, which meant the knife's movements were a mystery again. Since I was just sitting there thinking in silence, Penelope asked,
George, are we done with the footprints?
Ah, yeah. Sorry, I was just thinking about why Kenton would have gone to the cliff.
Oh, I did look into that, but nothing really stood out. I've questioned the students at her school, but her classmates all say there was nothing out of the ordinary that day. They all thought Kenton motorised was a little odd to begin with. She never really talked to anybody else, and even though she was attractive and well known, the boys had pretty much given up on asking her out. They didn't notice anything different that day, although the kids I spoke to were a little surprised about one thing. The school was asking about her plans for the future, and she said she was hoping to get a job after school ended. Like, she's got a title. Why would she need a job?
I thought. I'd sort of assumed she'd go on living in the motorised manor, flying planes with Stephen. But the times were changing, and maybe Kenton had more ambitious ideas.
At any rate, it's much too deserted a spot for someone to call her to, and it's too far away. Would any girl really go to a place like that alone? She ended up getting killed, but I can't imagine she'd agree to meet someone she thought might kill her in a place like that.
I dunno. I can't think of any reason why Kenton would have gone there, I groaned.
Then why not go?
Penelope suggested. Where?
To the cliff. We're just sitting here thinking, or perhaps we should start by visiting the scene of the crime?
I felt sure Tsukumajuku had often said the same thing, but it had slipped my mind entirely. 2 years since I'd been to these cliffs. A lot of memories here. This hill wasn't exactly motorised property or anything, but I found myself glancing over my shoulder as if Stephen might show up any minute. The slope down from the cliff top was gentle. There was a little forest at the bottom, and beyond that I could see the roof of the motorised manor. Stephen wasn't there, I knew. He was working somewhere in France.
This is where Kentons' body was found,
Penelope said, pointing at a large rock. Starshooter's rope had been tethered to that rock and to Kenton's body. I knew that rock. It was hard to believe anything so grisly had happened here. But that's where Stephen found her body. Kenton was stabbed 23 times in the face and the body, and tied to this rock, positioned so she was looking down at the house. When Stephen found her, she was still warm. She'd been killed not long before. Running that through my mind, something tugged at my mind again. Just like it had back at the house, when I was sitting with Penelope, thinking. Something wasn't right. What? When? Where? Tsukimijuku had flown Starshooter up here, seen Kenton and tied the glider to her as a signal. Stephen had seen it and ridden his horse up there. Somewhere in there. But what was it that was bothering me about that? Stephen's horse. Stephen had ridden a horse to find his sister's dead body. He might have started out on horseback. I looked back down the hill. On his way up the hill from the house, Stephen would have been able to see the top of the cliff, see her body long before he got here. It was a gentle slope all the way to their house. With the plane as a guide, even in the rain, he'd have seen her the second he left the woods. But if he saw Kenton lying there, why wouldn't he have sprouted wings? He would have. He always grew those wings when he was in a hurry to save someone. He wouldn't have wasted 5 or 10 minutes riding up the slope when he could be at his sister's side in a single swoop. Of course not. He would have grown them if he needed to. Stephen didn't mention that specifically, but it was a minor detail. Not important. Or was it? He'd spoken to me face to face, but didn't mention his wings. Wasn't that odd? I thought about it some more. Then a thought struck me. Tsukimijuku wasn't the only one who could float above the ground. Stephen could also have flown my plane. What was I thinking? Kenton was Stephen's sister. They were very close, and they were my friends. But the wheels in my brain kept spinning. If Stephen had killed Kenton and was trying to frame me for it, suddenly everything fell into place. I told him where I was going, and with his wings he could get to my house and back in minutes. Flown to my house and stolen a knife. He could have murdered Kenton anywhere, then placed her back on the cliff top, parked the plane outside the manor to match my movements, then taken it to the cliff top and tied it to her, flying it high to explain how he'd come to find her first. Finally he called the police. Once he got home again, he'd find out I'd vanished into thin air without ever leaving the manor. Despite carefully murdering Kenton at a time I'd have trouble establishing an alibi, he played the tragic role of a brother with a dead sister, coming to visit me in jail 6 days after I'd been put there, 10 days after her death. Not because he was grieving, but because he had to wait for his back to heal, and the wings to fall off.
I believe you. You'd never kill Kenton.
Had he been lying to my face? No way. I actually shook my head, even though Penelope was looking at me. I couldn't tell her about this yet. Stephen would never do a thing like that. I kept repeating that until I remembered something else. I know someone else with a sad power like hers. When Darlington said that to me, was it a hint? A sad power? That made sense, I thought. That's why Ben was so hell-bent on sticking the crime on me. He was protecting his son, or at least protecting the reputation of his family name. The reason he'd let a son of noble birth go work in France was because he wanted to get him away from all this till it settled down. This also explained why the last 2 years had managed to make Darlington so intimidating and formidable. This was the formidability of a girl suddenly thrust into the centre of her family affairs, and the whole intensity of someone who'd been grappling with her family's secret all this time. Stephen, was it true? What happened? Why would you ever kill Kenton? You were so close. Until I met them, they'd flown planes together, laughing and happy. I looked up at the sky and remembered. That was it. Kenton's father would never have allowed her to get a job. She wanted freedom, would have done anything to get away from him. But leaving her father meant leaving home, and that meant leaving Stephen. That was motive enough for murder. But I thought, what need was there to frame me for the murder? Did he have reason to resent me? I don't get it. I just don't get it. I took a few unsteady steps towards the edge of the cliff, and Penelope threw her arms around me. Careful! 3 steps further and I'd have fallen. and Stephen wasn't here to catch me anymore.
That reminds me, Penelope said. Harriet Motorise, their mother, threw herself off these very cliffs. Stephen would never have let Kenton go, but Kenton said it was better to die than to be trapped in a cage her whole life. She threw herself off there to torture Stephen,
Darlington said. 3 days after my first visit to the cliffs in 3 years, neither Darlington nor I mentioned plea bargains.
I wasn't there myself, but I know what happened. Stephen first grew those wings the day he couldn't save our mother. Kenton knew that as well as I did, and she told him she'd throw herself off those cliffs over and over until she died too. Stephen couldn't stand it. Not the sadness of seeing her try to kill herself over and over again. The pain of having his wings whip out of his back every time she did. You've seen them, right, George? Stephen's wings. Those huge, painful-looking wounds. The pain he felt every time they came out must have been unimaginable. But Stephen always smiled and acted like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Wings made out of flesh and bone tearing their way out of his back. Kenton knew just how much they hurt, but she kept pushing him until he exploded. All the anger he bottled up over the years. He realised that she knew how he suffered and kept placing herself in danger, taking advantage of him, doing whatever she liked, torturing him. Both of them taking their stress out on each other. Kenton was angry all the time. Stephen was bottling up his pain, pretending not to be angry. They could never have kept that up forever, and they both understood each other perfectly. Kenton may have been murdered, but it might as well have been suicide. I'm sure that she did throw herself off the cliff, so it began and ended as a suicide. But I think this way they're both free. Freed by the clash of their emotions. But you have no proof,
Darlington said, placing a teacup on its saucer. I didn't. And you won't testify in my favour.
Of course not. I'm Darlington Motorise. I have too much I need to protect. You're Joestar. You understand.
Did I? When I didn't answer, Darlington smiled.
You were friends with Kenton and Stephen, but you're always happier than them. You're the only heir the Joestars have. How can you be so carefree? Were you born that way? Or is it because you were brought up in a Spanish territory?
That might be part of it, but...
Or because you know someone else who carried the Joestar family for you?
That seemed closest to the mark. We'd moved Jonathan Joestar from La Palma Island to the basement here in England. He wasn't dead, and that might be part of what I felt the way I did. Like someday it'd be his day again, and I was just a temporary replacement. This was the first time I'd ever consciously thought that. If you're going to keep trying to frame me, I'll go find Stephen and make him confess, I said. Tell your father that. I may not be able to leave the country, but I can do that much. Darlington looked me right in the eye.
You've got more spine than I thought.
Yeah, I wasn't just the crap son of the Joestars. I was the boy driver gunning for the second-rank seat in the RAC.
I'll tell him,
Darlington said.
But there's a lot of people in on this now, and it won't be that easy to stop. The hardest thing for people to do is to know how to lower a fist once they've raised it.
I didn't care how long it took. If we were doing planes next, I had a lot to do, and a lot to learn. As I left the motorised manor for the first time in 2 years, for the second time ever, I thanked Faraday for the tea. I've no idea what he thought of me, or just how much he knew, but he fixed me with a gentle expression that stopped just short of being a smile, and said, I believe it will rain this evening, so do hurry home, Master Joestar. That reminded me. 2 years ago, that boy who came asking for me, did you happen to look at his feet? He was silent for a moment, then said, No. To tell the truth, I have done my best not to think about that visitor. Why? I found him quite sinister. I guess I can see that, but what did he look like to you, Master Joestar? He was my friend, Japanese kid. Nothing unusual, other than the fact he was floating. I see, Faraday said. To me he appeared to be a Spaniard, a terrifying Spaniard, with no eyes. He had eyes. A Spaniard? Not a Japanese kid who spoke Spanish? Yes, He wore his hat low, hiding his face, but there were dark pits where his eyes should be. His skin was browned, like any Spanish child. He was maybe 12 or 13. I've never seen anyone Japanese, but he was decidedly not Asian. Thinking back on it now, I believe that was something evil in the shape of a child. When I heard you vanished and were discovered underground in Rome, I knew that devil had done something to you, and it made absolute sense to me. I've never spoken to anyone about this. I've been too terrified. Much too terrified. What was he talking about? He was getting up there, but hardly seemed senile. What could he have seen that rainy evening? A year later, I was cleared of all suspicion in Kentons' murder and joined the Royal Aero Club with head held high. The year after that, John was the first Englishman to officially fly a plane on the island of Sheppey, and a year after that, in 1910, Charles Rolls died in an airplane crash, and John never again flew a plane. But there were plenty of us still flying, so I kept flying too. And an ill wind began to blow. You're a fool, George. The next war is going to be way bigger than any before, in fields, soldiers and weapons. Like John Moore Brassabon had said, the Great War came, and with it came other evils. End of chapter 9.